Why did I lose my smell and taste after COVID, and why hasn't it come back? In this video, we're going to go through some of the reasons why this phenomenon has happened with some people within long COVID, and also to discuss some possible solutions for them. So firstly, let's talk a little bit more specifically about smell. So what's come out in the research is that inflammation is playing a role in sustaining the anosmia. So what's been demonstrated is that SARS-CoV-2, the virus, can infect a cell called the sustentacular cells within the olfactory system. Because this cell contains the ACE2 receptor for its entry point, whereas the sensory neurons of the olfactory system don't contain that. So we tend to see the sustentacular cells get infected by the virus. And within the acute infection, we see obviously an influx of immune cells to try and protect the body. So we see a lot of neutrophils coming in, we see macrophages coming in, and many other different types of immune cells part of that response. However, when we look at people with PASC or long COVID, there seems to be a maintained inflammatory cycle going on within these cells. So we're seeing a continued infiltration of T cells within the sustentacular cells. So this is very similar to what we see generally with long COVID in that we have the initial infection and then that triggers the onset of chronic inflammation. So there was a triggering event and then the immune systems remain switched on and the inflammation is continuing and it's not switching off again, which seems to be what's happening with this phenomenon as well. So the inflammation is disrupting our sensory olfactory system, as well as we see a decrease in some of the sensory neurons taking place, and that's potentially because these sustentacular cells provide a supporting role for these more sensory cells. So when they don't get that, we're seeing some depletion of the sensory neurons, and therefore that may be part of the dysfunction that's occurring as well. An important point as part of this research that's come out is that as is a big topic within the long COVID, is whether there's any spike or viral persistence going on. It seems this process can happen without that present. So without any viral persistence, without any spike persistence, there seems to be the upregulation of the immune system being switched on, which is causing this process. There has been some research documenting the use of antivirals, things like ivermectin, and things when there has been some viral persistence going on, which has helped with anosmia, but this phenomenon can also happen without that as well. So our conversation when it comes to helping these people is, okay, so how do we decrease inflammation? How do we get the immune system to start switching off again? And that's something we'll come to a little bit more in the next part of the video. The next factor that seems to be playing a big role in this phenomenon is that surrounding zinc levels. So zinc has been well established to be playing a role in the phenomenon of anosmia and lack of smell and taste in particular. And this is because we have zinc-dependent enzymes in the body which maintain smell and taste. So when zinc gets depleted, this enzyme doesn't work properly, and then therefore we start losing our taste and smell. So there's a few reasons why we get a depletion of zinc. And this makes complete sense why this happens to people when they catch COVID, when they catch a viral type thing. Because when we get infection, zinc is going to be used up a lot within the immune system. So it tends to be sucked towards the immune cells to be used, and therefore it leaves less of it available for things like enzymes, other part of the body. And this is something I think we all can recognize when we catch a cold, when we pick up a virus, pick up a bug, our taste and smell, taste particularly starts going down. Water starts tasting really bad. We don't want to drink water. Other things we don't really like eating. So this is something we can relate to from past things. And that makes complete sense why this has happened to people in COVID. Now it seems to be that people are far more predisposed to losing their smell and taste when they have a baseline of low zinc or deficient zinc before the infection. So typically we'll see that, especially in the elderly or people that are aging a little bit more, we tend to see our zinc levels go down. And that's majorly because our stomach acid levels go down over time. So a big thing with elderly people, older people, is that stomach acid levels start to deplete. And when we see that, we start to get a lack of absorption of things like protein and minerals, in particularly like zinc. So we tend to find this a lot in an elderly population. Another population we'll see this in is people with underlying chronic conditions. And that makes sense and relates to what we said, is that, majority of chronic illness, it's driven by inflammation. So the immune system's switched on, there's inflammation happening, that uses up a lot of zinc. So they're already depleted a lot of their zinc levels before they get COVID. And therefore, COVID is like the last straw, the last strain to deplete that even further. You'll also find in relation to this that people taking medication will tend to have lower zinc levels. And especially things like ACE inhibitors, diuretics, beta blockers as well. So all part of this cardiometabolic type issues, and the meds related to that tend to deplete zinc as well. So it seems to be these two areas are really the two that are driving this process forward. Another thing that may be worth mentioning is the brain itself, which we know is impacted a lot by COVID. And it may potentially be that parts of the brain that are dealing with sensation are disrupted by COVID, and therefore we get a disruption in the perception of our sensations coming in. So we want to support that as well in our solutions, in our protocols, and our recommendations. So one of the first things that we might start thinking about when we want to try and get our smell and taste back is obviously zinc, leading on from that conversation. So, zinc supplementation might be something to think about, but there's a lot to that. So firstly, you want to make sure you got the right dosage. So what we know about zinc, it has a big interplay and balance with copper. And when we throw that out of balance, we can get issues. So generally what's known is if you stick to around up to 40 milligrams a day, you're generally safe. When you start getting to more 50 plus for a long period of time, you can run the risk of throwing that balance out. So it's worth working with someone to get some guidance on that, but generally it's okay to do as a short-term intervention to get a therapeutic dose, but you don't want to do it for too long in case of that. You might want to consider also using a zinc with copper in it, just to keep supporting that as well. But it's worth getting some guidance on that. And also probably worth testing to actually look at what your zinc levels are. So we can dosage zinc. We can also increase zinc containing foods. So heavily in things like meats, fish are big sources of that. Nuts and legumes as well. So you tend to see a lot of vegans really struggle with zinc, and the zinc copper balance is out. So they don't eat any meat and fish, they don't eat any animal products, which predominantly is where zinc is found. And they're very high in copper, which is all in the plants. So we can supplement it, we can eat more zinc foods. But eating stuff and taking the supplement is just one part of it. There's a whole other thing that is related to how well you absorb zinc, which is often the thing that people miss when they're trying to recover from this stuff is, they're taking the supplement, but they're not getting better, and it's often because they're just not absorbing well. So that can be from, like we said, we need stomach acid to be at the right level to absorb zinc. So, it's thinking about what is depleting my stomach acid. Is it just my age where, using some acid support would be beneficial, or is things like stress really reducing my stomach acid? You can use things like apple cider vinegar, betaine with pepsin, to try and support stomach acid. That can be quite helpful to do that. And then it's also thinking about, you know, how's the state of your gut lining and gut wall. So a lot of people with chronic digestive issues like Crohn's, celiac, colitis, they have a lot of inflammatory things going on in the gut. And often what you see is the gut's not absorbing well because there's been a lot of inflammation, a lot of damage there, depletes the surface area of the intestine, so we can't absorb as much nutrients. So supporting the gut wall is quite important. And again, this is maybe a situation where you need some more specific guidance on how to optimize nutrition and absorption if you have these issues. Another additional thing to add on with zinc is maybe using something like quercetin. Quercetin seems to support the role and function of zinc in the body. And then the next area is obviously, how do we stop the inflammatory process happening within the sustentacular cells and, you know, the general system? Because what we know about long COVID is that it's generally, you know, inflammation is remain switched on or is remain perpetuating in the body. So, you know, how do we stop inflammation happening and immune activity from happening? How do we get that to calm down? So there may be a few things you can do for this. So firstly, we obviously want to use anti-inflammatories to try and counteract that. So things like omega-3, turmeric, curcumin, things that are going to promote anti-inflammatory systems in the body to start switching on and down-regulate inflammation. We also want to think about, you know, what is actually contributing to keeping the immune system switched on. So what's actually increasing inflammation in the body and working to remove those things. And again, that comes with often working with someone, identify the things playing into this view, whether there's chronic underlying infections, whether there's stuff going on in the gut, whether there's food sensitivities, whether there's toxins promoting all that with you. Liposomal glutathione might be also a thing to think about. When there's inflammation happening, we often get a lot of oxidative stress and collateral damage, which perpetuates the problem further. So supporting glutathione in the body can help to support the cell to get hold of the inflammation and mitigate some of the inflammation happening. And so it's likely if we can support systemically reducing inflammation, we'll see that being reflected within the nasal cavity itself. By reducing immune activation across the whole body, we'll tend to see that locally as well. Now, it seems to be a lot of practitioners are using things like essential oils to help retrain smell with people, which seems to have mixed results. Some people it helps with, some people it doesn't. But that's maybe something to think about as a more direct application, using essential oils to try and retrain smell sensation. And then lastly, I think a big area to focus on is really supporting the brain, neural tissue, regeneration. A lot of this stuff really requires healthy fats. Our brain is really made, and nervous system is made up a lot of fat. So we need healthy fats in there to try and support that whole system. Again, like omega-3 fish oils, but all the other sort of healthy fats we get within the diet, really try and load that up because that's going to really help to regenerate and help support regeneration and rebuilding of neural tissue, the brain, as we start recovering from issues like these.